Hello everyone, my name is Ludwigson, and today I will continue talking about Project Britannica, and this video will be in four parts. Number one will be a recap of what I talked about last episode. Number two will be me correcting myself on what I got wrong. Number three will be me expanding on what new content we have, and number four will be me explaining the timeline's events in order from when it began to where it's currently taking place. To recap what I talked about last time, I'm not going to really cover what I talked about in regards to the facility. I'll just mainly regarding the timeline I made up. In March of 1911, the RMS Mauritania goes missing until the RMS Olympic finds it in June of 1911, with everyone on board missing, while also being infested by the mesh, as in the Mauritania being infested. During the same year, the RMS Lusitania sinks after hitting an iceberg on presumably April 14th. In 1915, the RMS Britannic is sunk by 8 explosions or implosions, I'm not quite sure on that. In 1984, the wreck of the Lusitania is rediscovered. And continuing onwards, in 1987, the facility interviews a survivor of Lusitania who is named Will McGowan. Now, to clarify real quick, the facility I'm referring to is called the Project Britannica facility. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about it here, so let's just continue onwards. In 1988, the Olympic is being turned into a hotel ship, but it's also become infested with the mesh, unfortunately. The same year, a guy that I named John was killed by the mesh at around 2:45 a.m. In 1997, the RMS Olympic goes missing until it was rediscovered in 2004. And with that said, I think it's time that I should correct myself with what I got wrong in the last video. The 5 things I got wrong was how the mesh was created, the character I named John was revealed to be named Oscar, the facility being able to completely remove the mesh, how the mesh works, and the Euro Olympic went missing. The correct answer to these 5 incorrections are as follows. Number 1. The mesh is not a time monster caused by time travel. It seems to in actuality be some form of a demon or abomination unleashed by the Saint Thorpe family in the year of 1911 after they started mining what they must have thought was coal at Devil's Tower, when it most likely was the mesh's natural form or something along that variant. Number 2. John actually having his name revealed to be Oscar isn't really anything to talk about in regards to Craig myself because John was just meant to be a fill in a name. Number 3. The facility seems to have tried to remove slash eradicate the mesh, but every time they've tried it, things have gone to hell. For example, when they tried it on the Britannic, it sank. Number 4. The mesh I really thought had some sort of time manipulation ability, which I was not very much correct on. But on the other hand, it does seem to have some sort of pocket dimension due to the fact it uses this to trap a guy, which I believe is named Alex. Because I think it's pointing towards that character actually being named Alex this time, and I hope I'm correct. But basically, Alex gets then trapped in an inescapable version of Olympic. Number 5. I said Olympic went missing in my previous video in 1997. In reality, it went missing in 1998 and returned in 2004. But yeah, that's all. That's all I can say that I got wrong in my last video. Now, the more videos get uploaded of this analog horror, the more points I will probably have be made incorrect, and I will be correcting myself for those in the next video I make on this, if there is another one. Hopefully there is. But anyways, that's besides the point. The point being that there's not much else I can correct myself on, so I'll be moving on to the third point of this video, which will be expanding on my theory. We are told that the origin of the mesh is from the coal mines at Devil's Tower, which is most likely located in the USA, due to the fact that Reagan was mentioned in the recording Expedition. To explain my version of what the mesh is and what its plan is, will go as follows. The mesh is a demonic entity found below or inside the mountain called Devil's Tower. It seems to work like a mold, infecting the walls of its host vessel before then turning the machinery of the ship, or like the machinery room would be more accurate, into the place it stores its heart, and also consuming the people on board for food, while also attacking those who try to remove it by sending them to a distorted reality of the same ship it's infected. In this realm, and rarely in our own world, it has a creature-like form it probably uses to then drag the victims to the place the mesh uses to then consume the victims for, well, energy or food. Another thing to mention is that the mesh requires a lot of heat to survive, due to the fact that it's very protective of the boiler rooms and engine rooms, and the gantries to an extent, as mentioned in one of the recordings. Now, with that said, I feel it's time we talk about the history of the mesh. It was first found and subsequently mined in the early months of 1911 and then loaded on board the Mauretania for one of her voyages, where after it was most likely put in her boiler, it was given life and then infected the ship and consumed everyone on board. Following this in the same year, it also must have infected Lusitania before the Lusitania itself sank, and unfortunately, Olympic seems to have been another victim of the mesh, and it seems to be the least infected out of all the ships to have been infected by the mesh. The mesh seems to then have gone on an infecting spree, infecting multiple ships such as Britannica, Empress of Britain, Aquitania, and many more. It most likely stopped infecting ships after the 1920s due to the fact that in the 1920s, at some point, I don't know the year exactly, but basically there was a switch in the fuel type of ships. Not that they turn into motor ships. No, no, more like they switch out the coal with oil because it was easier to refuel oil than coal, which would have meant that the mesh coal would have stopped being used, which means that ships after the 1900s would no longer be able to be infected, and even ships that were built before the 1920s were converted to burn oil. Even Mauritania and Olympic started burning fuel oil. So, uh, unless the railways, wait, they did mention it was safe to transport some of the mesh in a lorry because it was dead. But why would they be worried about transporting the mesh if it wasn't a ship that was transporting the mesh? No, that would mean the railways close to Devil's Tower would also be infected due to the fact buying coal from there would have been the cheapest and closest option, meaning hundreds of things could have been infected. Even the workshops building the locomotives could be infected by the mesh, because the mines at Devil's Tower was a coal and iron mine. Just think of it, goods yards, engine sheds, all full of locomotives and even wagons infected by the mesh. But I think that's enough regarding the mesh on that aspect. So let's move on and talk about the facility. The facility must have been around since around the 1910s due to the fact that the Britannic was infected by the mesh and they tried to get rid of the mesh on the Britannic, but Britannic, as we all know, sank in 1915, therefore they must have been around since before that time. Though the main point of the facility is to try to completely remove the mesh and hide it from the public. They have had success with keeping it hidden from the public, but when it comes to removing the mesh completely from any ship, they have had basically no progress or success on that section. But in the 1980s, they were at least able to make the Olympic safe enough for public use, as in they were able to remove enough mesh to where it was safe for the public to be on board the Olympic without, them having to worry that, well, the public would find the mesh. And they take the whole keeping it hidden from the public very seriously, as they've actually detained people who know of the mesh's existence, and maybe they have detained people who died on the sinking of the Lusitania, but were consumed by the mesh, and they've been able to retract those people and are basically interviewing those people. Because that would explain how Will McGowan is only 19 in 1911, but has somehow only aged 3 years and is only 22 in 1987. But that's all I can say in regards to expanding my theory. So let's just wrap up the video and talk about the new timeline and when the series takes place, as in when the main events take place. Like, and when I mean main event, I'm talking about like the 80s, which is put in like a present moment, where like the characters talk as if this isn't them talking about the past, but talking about the present. Whereas everything before that, they talk more about as if it's the past because it is the past. Now, before I start reading off the timeline in order of from start to finish, I would like to show this visual timeline I made. And the timeline isn't time accurate in the sense of every year would be counted. It's more or less I've put up the main years and I've tried to spread them out evenly and try to put them together so they look like even in case I have to add, a year here, a year there, but it's not the best, so do apologies. Now, with everything said in this video, I feel it's time that I wrap it up by giving the timeline I've concluded to be true until I am proven wrong. So let's begin this timeline. It all began in 1911 when a mine at Devil's Tower opened up and started selling coal, which was purchased by multiple shipping companies and used on ocean liners. The company that operated mines, nor the companies that operated the ships, knew that this coal was infected by the mesh. And in the same year, the ocean liner RMS Mauritania goes missing in March after having been presumably infected by the mesh. But that's not the end of it. After a month of the Mauritania's disappearance, her sister ship, the RMS Lusitania, sinks in the North Atlantic Sea after striking an iceberg. However, in June of 1911, the newly built ocean liner RMS Olympic finds the RMS Mauritania floating adrift with everyone on board her missing. After the RMS Mauritania is towed back to port, it is assumed that the facility that deals with the mesh, aka the Project Britannica facility, was founded and at least tried to get rid of the mesh on board the RMS Mauritania. And we know this because the fact that they tried to get rid of the mesh on board the RMS Britannic, which sank in June of 1915. Therefore, the facility must have been founded between 1915 and 1911. After the sinking of the Britannic, not much else in regards to what is considered the past happens. Though, a thing to mention is that in 1935, or at least around that time, it is presumed that multiple ships which have been infected by the mesh are taken to the secret docks at the facility, but are told to the public that that these ships have been scrapped due to the fact that they don't want the public to know of the mesh's existence. However, it seems that sometime in the mid 1900s or late 1900s, the Olympics deemed safe enough to be viewed by the public and is taken to be turned into a hotel ship at South Shields. Now, that all of that I've just mentioned are in universe considered past events. I will now be mentioning what in universe is considered current events. This means anything between the 1984 all the way up to 2004. In the year of 1984, a man who is named something along the lines of Mr. Saintthorpe is trying to find a way to completely get rid of the mesh on board every ship that has been infested by it. Now, the mesh is something he and his family released plenty of years ago. In the same year, the Lusitania is found, and Mr. Saintthorpe manages to somehow extract someone from the wreck named Will McGowan and, presumably, many others. The reason why this might be the case, though, is the fact it is the only logical way for Will to have only aged 3 years between 1911 and 1987. Between 1984 and 1987, it is implied that many people who have by now been extracted from the wreck of the Lusitania are being interviewed as to what happened on the night of the sinking. In 1987, Will McGowan is yet again interviewed. Presumably, he's been interviewed a few times before this due to some of his dialogue, but that's beneath the point. The main point being that this time, this singular interview, something in Will's head finally snaps, and he goes rogue and basically manages to escape the facility. After his escape, not much is known about what happened to him. I personally like to believe that he went into hiding and is trying to avoid the authorities and any workers of the facility because he most likely does not want to go back. In 1988, Oscar Saintthorpe, who is Mr. Saintthorpe's son, is killed by the mesh and is publicly reported as missing instead of reported as dead. This, on the other hand, causes conflict within the heads of the facility as to what to do. In other news, elsewhere, the mines at Devil's Tower are shut down, presumably because of the mesh. Then, at some point, we are also shown what happens to people who get consumed by the mesh when Alex is sent to what can only be described as a distorted realm where he is chased down by a creature before finding safety in the engine room of the Olympic, where he then finds the literal heart of the mesh. In 1996, the renovations of the Olympic are still ongoing, including the mesh being still a problem. In 1998, Olympic somehow goes missing with everyone on board her also going missing until in 2004 the Olympic is finally found close to the Isle of Man. However, everyone on board her is gone. But that's all for the timeline so far. And that's all for this time. There's not much else to discuss, so I would like to thank you all for watching the whole video through, and do consider leaving a like and subscribing if you wish to see more content like this in the future. And with all of that said, thank you and goodbye.